In the suburban sprawl of Franklin, Tennessee, where manicured lawns and SUVs defined the rhythm of life, Leela Hayes was a woman who faded into the background. At 41, she was slight, with chestnut hair streaked with grey, always pulled into a practical braid. Her clothes, faded jeans, a second-hand cardigan and worn loafers, spoke of a life stretched thin by necessity. Lila worked as a part-time cashier at a local grocery store and cleaned houses on weekends, her hands rough from scrubbing floors and ringing up canned goods. To the affluent parents of Franklin Middle School, where her 12-year-old son, Caleb, was a 7th grader, she was just another working-class mom, barely worth a glance. They looked at her clothes and laughed. The parents at the school's annual open house would later recall, their voices tinged with regret. On a warm September evening, the school gymnasium was transformed into a showcase of student projects, with tables displaying science experiments, art portfolios, and history dioramas. The air buzzed with chatter as parents in tailored blazers and designer dresses mingled, sipping coffee from a catered cart. Lila arrived late, her shift at the grocery store running over, her cardigan slightly askew from rushing across town on her bike. As she stepped into the gym, clutching a water bottle and scanning for Caleb's table, a group of mothers near the entrance turned. One, Vanessa Red, a real estate agent with perfectly highlighted hair, whispered to her friend, "Is that Caleb's mom? She looks like she just cleaned someone's attic, Turk." Her companions giggled, their voices carrying over the hum of the crowd. Another parent, Greg Larson, a tech consultant, smirked. "I bet she's here to mop the floor after we leave." Lila's cheeks flushed, but her hazel eyes, deep and steady, carrying the weight of a life forged in hardship, remained fixed on finding her son. She was used to being ignored or mocked. Growing up in a small trailer park outside Memphis, Lila had lost her parents young, her mother to a heart attack, her father to alcohol. Raised by her grandmother, a seamstress who taught her resilience and kindness, Lila had worked since she was 15, bagging groceries and babysitting to help pay bills. When her grandmother passed, Leela, then 18, moved to Franklin, hoping for a fresh start. She met Caleb's father, a charming but unreliable musician, who left when Caleb was 2, leaving Leela to raise him alone. She poured her love into Caleb, sacrificing dreams of college to ensure he had books, clothes, and a chance at a better life. She spotted Caleb at a table displaying his science project, a model of a solar-powered water purifier, meticulously crafted with recycled materials. "I wouldn't miss it, kiddo," she said, ruffling his hair. But as she listened to Caleb explain his project, Vanessa approached, her tone patronizing. Caleb, your project's creative," she said, glancing at Lila. "Did you get help with this? It's quite advanced." The implication was clear. A boy with a mother like Lila couldn't have done this alone. Caleb's smile faltered, but Lila squeezed his shoulder, her eyes calm. "He did it himself," she said softly. "He's smart like that." Vanessa raised an eyebrow and walked away, her friends trailing behind, their laughter echoing. Lila felt the sting, but she focused on Caleb, praising his work. As the evening ended, she slipped a folded note into his backpack, a habit she'd started when he was young, leaving him words of encouragement. Tonight's note read, "You're my hero, Caleb. Keep shining. Love, Mom." She had no idea that note would change everything. The next morning, Caleb's science teacher, Ms. Rachel Conway, a warm but overworked educator in her 30s, found the note while checking Caleb's backpack for a missing worksheet. Touched by the words, she read it aloud to her class during a discussion about motivation, not realizing Lila's private words would spark curiosity. "Who wrote this?" asked Sophie, Vanessa's daughter, her tone more curious than cruel. Caleb, blushing, admitted my mom. The class buzzed, some kids snickering at the thought of Caleb's plain, quiet mother as a source of inspiration. But Miss Conway, sensing something deeper, tucked the note away and later asked Caleb about his mother. "She's always there for me," he said, his voice soft. "She works a lot, but she never misses my stuff." Intrigued, Miss Conway shared the note with the principal, Dr. Ellen Harper, a pragmatic woman who valued community but often bowed to the influence of wealthy parents like Vanessa. Dr. Harper, who'd barely noticed Lila at the open house, was moved by the note's simplicity. "We should recognize parents who support their kids like this," she said. "And let's invite Ms. Hayes to the next DC meeting." The invitation came as a shock to Lila, who assumed it was a mistake. She arrived at the tar meeting in her usual jeans and cardigan, feeling out of place among the polished parents in the school library. Vanessa and Greg were there, their smiles tight as Lila sat near the back. When Dr. Harper mentioned the note, praising Lila's dedication, the room shifted. The room shifted. They looked at her clothes and laughed. A parent whispered, but others leaned forward, curious. Vanessa, sensing the spotlight shift, spoke up. "It's nice, but lots of parents support their kids." "Why single her out?" Her tone was dismissive, and Greg nodded. Lila's eyes met theirs, steady but silent, her strength unspoken. The meeting might have ended there, but Miss Conway, who'd done some digging, stood up. "There's more to Lila's story," she said, her voice firm. She revealed what she'd learned from Caleb and school records. Lila had been a gifted student in high school, accepted to Vanderbilt University on a scholarship for engineering, but gave it up to care for her dying grandmother. After moving to Franklin, she'd quietly helped other families, paying for a neighbor's groceries, tutoring kids at the library, even fixing a school bus during a field trip when the driver was stranded. The room grew quiet, Vanessa's smile faltering. Miss Conway continued. "Lila's been funding Caleb's science supplies herself, working extra shifts to buy him books and tools." "That solar purifier?" She taught him the basics from what she remembered of engineering. Dr. Harper, stunned, asked Lila to speak. Lila hesitated, her hands clasped tightly. "I just do what I can," she said, her voice low. "Caleb's my world. I don't need recognition." She pulled out her journal, a worn notebook filled with poems and sketches, and read a short piece about motherhood, its sacrifices, its joys. Her words, raw and honest, left the room speechless. "They should have looked at her eyes instead," Greg muttered, his voice thick with regret. Vanessa, cornered by her own judgment, stayed silent. The note's impact spread beyond the TA. Caleb's classmates, inspired by his mother's story, started a campaign to honor unsung heroes at school. The local paper ran a feature on Lila, titled "Other Mother Behind the Note," detailing her sacrifices and quiet generosity. Donations poured in for a school STEM program, with Lila's input shaping its focus on hands-on learning for all kids, not just the privileged. Vanessa, humbled, approached Lila at the grocery store. "I was wrong," she said, her eyes downcast. "I judged you by your clothes. I'm sorry." Lila nodded, her smile gentle. "We all make mistakes," she said. "Just keep supporting so." Greg, whose son was in Caleb's class, offered to fund a scholarship in Lila's name, and other parents joined in, transforming the school's culture. Lila, uncomfortable with the spotlight, kept working, but she accepted a role advising the STEM program, her engineering knowledge resurfacing. Amid the changes, Lila formed a friendship with Miss Conway, who saw her as a kindred spirit. Over coffee at a local diner, they shared stories of overcoming hardship, and Rachel encouraged Lila to pursue her old dreams. "You're not done learning," Rachel said. "What if you went back to school?" Lila laughed, but the idea took root. With Rachel's help, she enrolled in online engineering courses, balancing them with work and motherhood. A quiet romance bloomed with Tom Ellis, a mechanic who'd known Lila from the diner, their bond built on shared values and small moments. Years later, the STEM program, now called the Hayes Scholars Initiative, had sent dozens of kids to college. Lila, with an associate's degree in engineering, worked part-time as a consultant, her designs improving local infrastructure. Her poetry, published in a small anthology, inspired parents and students alike. At a school ceremony honouring the programme's 10th anniversary, Lila spoke, her voice steady. They looked at my clothes and laughed, she said, her hazel eyes bright. They should have looked at my eyes instead. I'm just a mom who loves her son, but one note showed me we're all stronger than we seem. The crowd stood, silent, then erupted in cheers. Leela Hayes, ignored at her son's school, had changed everything with one note, and a heart that refused to be unseen. A decade after the note that changed Franklin, Tennessee, Lila Hayes's life had woven itself into the town's heart, though she remained stubbornly true to her roots. The Hayes Scholars Initiative, born from her son Caleb's school project and her own buried engineering talents, had grown beyond Franklin Middle School. It now supported STEM programs in 10 Tennessee counties, offering hands-on workshops, scholarships and mentorship to kids from struggling families. Lila's poetry, published as Unseen Sparks, was taught in local schools, its verses about resilience and quiet strength, quoted by students and teachers alike. Yet Lila still worked the early shift at the grocery store, still cleaned houses on weekends, her faded jeans and cardigan as familiar as her hazel eyes, which carried a fire no one could ignore. As they looked at her clothes and laughed, the parents at Franklin Middle School often recalled, their voices now filled with pride. They should have looked at her eyes instead. That night at the open house, when Lila was mocked and ignored, had become a local legend, a story of how one woman's note to her son reshaped a community. But visibility, after years of blending into the background, was a double-edged sword for Lila. One chilly November morning, as Lila helped a group of high schoolers build a solar panel in the school's new STEM lab, a visitor arrived. Dr. Karen Whitmore, a program director from the National STEM Education Alliance in Nashville, had read about the Hayes Scholars Initiative and wanted Layla to keynote their annual conference. Your story is a game changer, Karen said, her tailored blazer a stark contrast to Layla's worn cardigan. A single mom, self-taught, turning sacrifice into opportunity. We need you to inspire educators and policymakers across the country. Lila paused, her hands steady on a soldering iron. I'm not a speaker, she said, her voice low but firm. I do this for the kids here, not for big crowds. Karen leaned forward, undeterred. That's exactly why you're perfect. You're real. People need to hear from someone who's lived it, not just studied it. If Rachel Conway, Lila's friend and Caleb's former teacher, who'd been mentoring a student nearby, chimed in. She's right. Leela, you've already changed Franklin. You could change more lives if you step up. Lila's fingers tightened around her journal, tucked in her bag as always. She thought of the open house, the sting of Vanessa's laughter, the silence when her note was revealed. She'd faced judgment before and turned it into purpose. But a national conference with its polished attendees and formal speeches felt like a leap into unfamiliar territory. Her eyes met Rachel's, then Karen's, her resolve wavering but steady. Shall think about it, she said finally. But I'm not dressing up. That evening, in her small apartment above the grocery store, Lila sat with Tom Ellis over a pot of coffee, their ritual for tough moments. Their romance, built on shared laughter and quiet support, had deepened into a partnership that felt like home. Caleb, now a high school junior interning at a local engineering firm, was out with friends, leaving them alone. What if I mess this up? Lila asked, her journal open to a half-finished poem. Those people, they're not like me. They've got degrees, fancy jobs. Etam, his mechanic's hands steady as he poured more coffee, smiled. You've got something better. Heart, you raised Caleb, built this program, kept going through everything. That's what they need to see. Leela's eyes softened, her grandmother's words echoing in her mind. Be who you are, Lila. That's enough, she nodded. Okay, she said. But I'm wearing my jeans. The National STEM Education Conference was held in a sleek Nashville convention center, its halls filled with educators, scientists, and policymakers in business attire. Lila arrived in her faded jeans and cardigan, her journal clutched for courage. As she walked through the crowd, she felt the familiar sting of glances, some curious, others dismissive. They looked at her clothes and laughed, a few attendees whispered, noting her lack of polish. But Lila's hazel eyes, sharp with purpose, silenced their doubts. On stage, Karen introduced her with a video montage. Clips of Lila teaching kids to wire circuits, Caleb presenting his solar purifier, and Franklin parents sharing how the Hayes Scholars Initiative changed their lives. Lila Hayes, Karen said, a woman who turned sacrifice into strength. The audience applauded, but Lila stood quietly, her hands steady. She spoke simply, her Tennessee accent grounding her words. I'm not here because I'm special. I'm here because I know what it's like to be overlooked. Working 2 jobs, raising a kid alone, giving up dreams to survive. But I learned you don't need money or a degree to make a difference. You need heart. She shared stories of her students. A girl who'd built a wind turbine, a boy who'd earned a scholarship to MIT, a veteran who'd found purpose in engineering. She read a poem from her journal, its lines about resilience and small victories, leaving the room hushed. When she finished, the silence was profound, broken by a standing ovation. Karen, tears in her eyes, hugged Leela. You've given us a vision, she said. Backstage, attendees approached, sharing their own stories of struggle, inspired by Lila's honesty. Vanessa Red, now a supporter of the STEM program, was there, her earlier judgment replaced by admiration. I was so wrong about you, she said. Thank you for showing us. The conference brought a flood of support for the Hayes Scholars Initiative, with grants and partnerships from universities and non-profits. But growth brought challenges. A corporate sponsor, Tech Trend Innovations, offered a massive grant to expand the program nationally, but their terms included standardized curricula that clashed with Lila's hands-on, community-driven approach. At a tense meeting in Franklin, their representative, Paul Carter, dismissed Lila's concerns. You're an inspiration, Miss Hayes, but you're not a strategist, he said. Lila's eyes flashed. This isn't about strategy, she said. It's about kids who need to know they're enough, not just numbers on a grant. Rachel and Tom backed her, citing the program's success. They rejected the grant, choosing smaller, local partnerships instead. The decision strained resources, but Lila leaned into her work, training teachers and mentoring students. Her evenings with Tom, sketching engineering designs and revising poems, kept her grounded. You're my strength, she told him one night, her smile soft. 5 years later, the Hayes Scholars Initiative had programs in 20 states, each rooted in Lila's vision. Her poetry inspired a national scholarship fund, and her workshops empowered thousands. Lila, now with a bachelor's degree in engineering, worked as a consultant, her designs improving schools and community centres. She kept her cashier job, her life simple, her love with Tom a quiet anchor. At a national STEM summit, Lila spoke to a crowd of thousands. They laughed at my clothes, she said, her hazel eyes bright. They should have looked at my eyes instead. I'm just a mom who kept going, but one note showed me we're all stronger than we seem.